This is Revolutionizing Recruitment with Kathleen Duffy, the art of attracting, acquiring, and retaining talent. Here's Kathleen.
Welcome back to my conversation with Eric Bailey, the best-selling author of The Cure for Stupidity and the president of Bailey Strategic Innovation Group. Eric, in part one, we discussed you winning the award for the son-in-law of the year after you helped your wife's dad navigate a difficult conversation at work. But you've also been honored as the diversity leader of the year. So I want to get into the DE&I and the workshop that Bailey Strategic Innovation Group offers. One of the things that you've said is that even if you don't know where to start, you've got to start the conversation. And many of us, including myself, are paralyzed by the fear of putting our foot in our mouth. So I'm curious about the work that you're doing and how you're leveraging the work from the Harvard Business School's research on why diversity training doesn't work and how to start that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So as in my time in HR, I sat through so many, and I use that phrase intentionally, sat through so many awful presentations on diversity, so many. And the common theme that I see out there is, there's a right way to think and a wrong way to think. And if you think wrong, let me tell you why you're wrong and how to think right. Which has its merits, I guess. But what it does in my experience is it makes a lot of people feel really defensive. And as I mentioned earlier, when people are feeling defensive, they are not going to change behavior. They're not going to hear what maybe needs to be heard. And so what I've done, kind of leveraging the psychology of communication and the brain science of how we interact with these things, I've realized that everyone is at a different point in this journey, right? So let's say collectively over the last 30 years, we've been on this journey, and trying to understand, these preconceived notions about women in the workplace. Okay, our ideas have been transitioning over the last half a century, about, different races and their intelligence have been transitioning over the last half a century. And so as we start to do this, everyone's at a different point in their journey, right? Because we're always on this ongoing journey. And so what we can't do is we can't make, or I guess we can, but we shouldn't do is we shouldn't make people feel bad for where they are in their journey. Right? Everyone's starting from a different place. And so in the work that we do, we leverage the research from Frank Dobbins of Harvard, and he's done a series of research studies on why diversity training fails, and a lot of it comes from this idea that a lot of times diversity sessions are mandatory, right? Because we want everyone to go through the same thing. Right. And two, paired with that is a misconception of what the goal is. And so a lot of times, for example, we're going to have a bias training, or we're going to have a training on understanding our implicit biases. And people have a misunderstanding of what that means. And so I ask people all the time, like, what does bias mean? And people, bias means racism. Bias means, sexism and ageism and homophobia, all the isms. And if you're saying I have to go to a bias training, are you accusing me of being a racist or a sexist or homophobic or whatever? Right? Those are all bad things. I am a good person. And if you're saying this, you're saying I'm a bad person. And so if you're forcing me to go to this training, I already resent you. And people actually will walk into the door with resentment. And at that point, right, defensive behavior, they're not going to hear anything, right? They're going to just be looking for evidence that, look, see, you're trying to say I'm wrong. And what we want to do is we want to welcome people in the conversation. We want people to know that you are welcome. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, Starbucks did this big, huge thing as a response to, there was a barista, I don't remember where they were, but there was a black gentleman, and he was waiting for somebody for a meeting. And he didn't buy anything. He was just sitting there on his laptop, just working. And they're like, sir, if you're not going to buy anything, you need to leave. And he's like, no, I'm meeting someone. And the woman, the barista, ended up calling the cops, and it was a big, huge ordeal. Starbucks, shortly after that, shut down every single store. And they sent everyone to this mandatory training, bias training, implicit bias training. I would venture to guess that a good number of Starbucks employees really, really hated that. Really hated it, right? You're forcing me to do this thing or whatever. And you see, these sorts of things still happen, right? It's not like they cured anything, but we're having the same kind of conversation. And so what we've done is kind of leverage the principles of human understanding, the brain science, the psychology of human connection. And we've parlayed that on top of the diversity conversation. So it's not about anyone's in the wrong for what their opinion is we make a safe place where everyone can explore where they are in the current situation. And then we give them tools to take a step forward, whether it's understanding some of the misconstrued language like bias. Like we go down, let's look at the dictionary definition of bias. And let's say, why do we have biases? Where does it come from? And we dive into anthropology and bias used by our brains as a tool for survival. It's like, oh my gosh, so bias doesn't mean what I thought it means. Oh, and then we go into things like privilege, and the conversation on privilege is probably one of the most important conversations we have because unfortunately, the media has really leveraged the emotional spark generated by the word privilege. Like people get really emotional. And so what does the media do? They leverage that and they try to pull people in different directions. And I say, no, let's stop that. Let's go down to the baseline understanding. What are we talking about? How does privilege show up in an infinite number of different ways? And I say, privilege has nothing to do with like silver spoons in your mouth or never having to work or never having to struggle. That's not what privilege means. Privilege means, I'm going to give you a little preview. I guess we're going to go right into it, Kathleen.
Mm-hmm.
Privilege means that a member of a group may not have to worry about something that a member of another group may have to worry about. And that's it, right? But the best example that I have is, handedness, right? So I'm a right-handed person and I have right hand privilege. What does that mean? Does that mean I don't have struggles? Of course I have struggles, right? Does that mean that I haven't had to work hard? Of course I've had to work hard. But it means that I don't have to worry about certain things that a left-handed person may have to worry about. For example, when I write on a piece of paper, I know we write in English, we write left to right on the right side of the paper. So when I write, my hand is resting on the paper, but the ink is following my hand as I move it across the page. A left-handed person, their hand rubbing on the paper, if they rest their hand on paper, would be dragging through the ink as it's fresh on the paper. And so you see a lot of left-handed people totally craning their wrist to write, or they turn their paper sideways and they write weird, right? And they do that because they have to worry about the ink on their hands. That is something that I've never had to worry about. Never thought someone ever would have worried about because that's privilege. There's nothing wrong with it. Privilege is not a bad thing, but when we truly understand what it is, we're able to empathize with someone that might have a worry that we don't. And that's the whole point, right? And so when we reframe a concept like that, it's like, oh, and now we can have a different conversation, right? And that's where it gets really powerful. It's not about blaming or shaming. It's about understanding. And when we understand each other's experiences, we can have better conversations. We have better dialogue.
Yeah, interesting. And I was thinking about, as you were talking about the bias and just being more aware. And I had a situation recently where I was meeting a woman, and she's the CEO of an organization. She's recently relocated to the Phoenix area. She's a new mom. So we were chatting about this. And so, of course, my bias says she has a husband. And instead of saying, did your husband trail with you? Was he a trailing spouse? There was something in my brain that thankfully was working that day. And I said, did your spouse come with a position, or did they have to find one? And her response was, no, she had a really great job and was able to relocate here and is able to work remotely. And I thought, okay, good job, Kathleen. You are really becoming aware that not everybody has a traditional makeup. So I think that it kind of gets back to what you were saying, even with these difficult conversations. It's just really about understanding yourself too, and putting that out there.
Yeah. One of the things that's really, really interesting with that, Kathleen, is, all right, so let's say you did say husband and trailing, and she's like, actually, my wife, and those sorts of things, they're going to happen, right? We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have, right, previous assumptions or just things we're just used to saying. And I think one of the most important things about this work and kind of the journey is when we make mistakes, how we show up. Because we're going to I make mistakes all the time. In fact, one of the best examples of this is the phrase "you guys." And I have said you guys my entire life, addressing a group of people, you guys. And a few years ago, I was doing a women's leadership session with one of my business partners, Nicole Lance. We were in Ventura, California with the League of Women in Government. And we were running this workshop series, and it's a room full of 98% professional women, and there were a couple of men in the room. And so I kept saying, you guys, right? Addressing a group of women. And I heard it, right? I heard it. And I actually asked the group, and I said, I apologized, because I noticed a couple people kind of like looking at each other, right? Like kind of whispering under their breath. And so I said, okay, I hear it. And I'm going to ask you to help me be accountable to this. Because at this point, because it's so routinized in my language patterns, that I oftentimes won't hear it. And so when I facilitate workshops like this, I've got like squishy balls and, slinkies and all these kinds of things on the table. And so I'm like, take one of the balls, the soft squishy balls. And when I say you guys, just chuck it at me, right? And so because I needed awareness to it, and I couldn't change it on my own. I needed a group of people to help me out. And so the first time I did it, I didn't even know that I said it. And boom, I'm just like all these balls flying at me. It was hilarious, right? And then I say thank you. And what happened is we created this environment where it was about learning, because I acknowledged that there was something I could learn. And so when someone corrects me, the first thing I always try to say now is thank you. And if it's something that I said that might have been offensive, I say I'm sorry. And if it's something that I don't understand, I try to put myself in that idea of curiosity. I'm so sorry. I just know I did not intend to offend you. I understand that I did. Can you help me understand what I said or why that offends you? And if you don't want to, that's totally fine. But I really want to understand here, and I feel like there's something I don't know. And that is such a situation where instead of like, what I try to do is create this group of people around me that feel comfortable to correct me. If I say something and, I've used a phrase wrong, or I, leverage some idiom or something in speech that is offensive to a group of people that I've never even thought of or considered, like I want to put myself in a position where the people around me feel safe enough to correct me. And right, that's the relationship we can have. And so I love that you did that, Kathleen. And I love that you kind of checked yourself, because you've probably become aware of it, right? Because awareness is the first step. And then we start to modify our behaviors. Now, and I'm not going to speak on you specifically, but people may have still ideas of what a family looks like, just kind of in their head, right? These biases we have in our heads. But it's important for us to recognize that bias and behavior are not the same thing, right? Our biases likely won't go away. We can learn more about them, but we have kind of natural biases. But what you did, very specifically, you chose a behavior, a line of questioning, or a specific phrasing that was maybe outside of your expectation, right? And that's what is going to help us engage and take steps forward in the world is, okay, maybe people walking down the street may see me, a 6 foot tall, 30-something black guy, right? Maybe their natural reaction is, ooh, should I be scared right now? Right? Maybe that's their bias, maybe, right? But they choose a behavior that isn't aligned with that, because intentional behaviors are separate from our biases. When we become aware of them, then we can start choosing behaviors intentionally. And someone say, hey, right? Or walk, give me a fist bump, high five, whatever. And all of a sudden, now because the behavior was that way, we were able to, maybe connect deeper or learn from each other, or maybe whatever. And so that's really, really fantastic what you did. And I think it's instructive to all of us, right? It is a powerful thing to become aware and to behave in ways that are kind of, now I know better, I can do better.
Absolutely. And we know that companies are really starting to see they've always known the importance of it, but I think the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusivity, and they're adding the word belonging now.
Yeah.
And in our world, we're getting a lot more inquiries to recruit ahead of DE&I. But what's interesting is of late, more organizations are coming to us with talent acquisition roles that blend DE&I with that.
Yes.
Are you seeing that too?
Yes, quite a bit. And actually, I think we may have actually sent a couple of people your direction, because they were asking about how they can do that work with this DEIB lens. And, the work that you all are doing is so critical, because if you figure, and this is something that a lot of people don't really think about, like, how did we get here? Right. And this is where my nerdy brain goes. And we think about inclusivity, and we think about belonging, and, bringing people in, and, being open. If we're unaware of our own biases, we may not have the opportunity to see that maybe our hiring decisions aren't as open as we thought they were. Or people may end up with a conclusion like, oh, it's so difficult to find a qualified, fill in the blank here, candidate, right? And unfortunately, that phrasing is actually detrimental to so many people. So in engineering, we hear people say, oh, it's so hard to find a qualified Black candidate. But what that does is, it does a couple things. One is it kind of feeds this idea that Black candidates are not qualified, right? The Black candidates applying are not qualified. Two, if a Black candidate is hired, there must have been something extra because they're quote unquote diverse. Oh, they're maybe given that job because they're Black, which is difficult for that employee. Now they have to go and face that and prove that, that they deserve the position, which, many other employees don't have to do. But also it reinforces these ideas that have been lingering in our society for far too long. And so there's really interesting research about this idea of, the qualified Black engineer. And they found that, I don't remember the exact numbers, but something like 12% of engineering degrees are conferred among Black students. Right, so about all the engineering degrees conferred in a year, about 12% are going to Black students. And they find that of new engineering hires, only 6% are Black, kind of around the country. And so what does that mean? That means that there are more qualified Black engineers than are being hired. And so when you look at that, it's like, oh, right. So maybe we're just not looking in the right place. And this idea of blending talent acquisition with this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, we want to think about, if you look at the data of your employees, does it match the data of kind of the diversity of the population? In many cases, it doesn't. In some cases, it does. But what you do is you can start to see that a lot of our hiring practices are built on bias, right? We want to hire people. I mean, essentially, we want to hire people that we want to work with. I mean, basically, we want to hire people that it would be enjoyable or productive for us to engage with on a daily basis. And so what helps us identify that? It's not their experience, it's the interview. And if I have a nice, good connection with somebody, I am more likely to hire them with the same experience than someone I didn't connect with. And you start to slowly look at what are the type of people that you like to spend time with. And this is a wonderful exercise that we do. You look at all the people you spend time with. Well, they kind of usually fit a certain set of demographics in a lot of different categories, right? But it might be, they're of a certain age. Maybe they're a certain level of intellect. Maybe they're a certain race. Maybe a certain sexual orientation. Maybe it's disability. So all these different categories, you can see, oh, almost everyone that I spend time with or enjoy spending time with fit these maybe personalities, maybe fit these different categories. Oh, maybe I have a bias, right? And so when you slowly start to engage the talent acquisition piece with diversity, you can slowly start to deconstruct that. You see a lot of people doing blind applications right now, kind of like The Voice. You see people doing blind interviews. You see all these things happening because whether we like to think so or not, we do have feelings about people and their height. We do have feelings about people and their gender. We do have feelings, right? Biases, not the same thing as behaviors. Not the same thing as behaviors, but we do have these feelings. And one of the best ways, if you don't believe me, right? A lot of people don't believe, like, oh, whatever, Eric, you know what I'm talking about, right? Think about, we were on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever video chat platform for a couple of years. And undoubtedly, there's going to be people on our team that we've never met face to face. And then the first time we ever meet them face to face, what is the first thought we have? Wow, you're really tall. You're shorter than I thought you were. You're tall. Our first thought is height. Why is that one of the first things we think of? Because height is one of those biases that we have, right? We associate taller people with more powerful people, right? And this is something that research has shown over and over again. And we realize, oh my gosh, height matters to me. It's the first thing I notice when I see someone for the first time. And especially in Zoom when we're all the same height, right? We're all about, 2/3 from the bottom of the screen up, or middle of the screen. So we're all the same height on Zoom, and all of a sudden, whoa, if it stands out to you, that means you probably have a bias around height. All right. And not necessarily your behaviors, but you have a bias. And we start to understand our biases, you can see, or there might be more for me to learn here.
Well, yes, it was nice to be 6 feet tall on Zoom. For those of you that have never met me, I'm only 4'11" and 3/4 on a good day.
But you wear those heels well, though, Kathleen.
Yes, I do. I have my baby heels because I have a back surgery, but that's a whole nother story. Okay, but I can't let you go without you telling us about flying an F-16 fighter jet. I watched that video and nearly puked.
It is one of the coolest experiences of my life. So I've done a lot of work with Luke Air Force Base out in Phoenix, Arizona, and I got to work really closely with the former general of the base, and he's still a good friend of mine. We talk once every couple months. He's a wonderful human being, and so I actually was recommended by him to be in the honorary commander program, which is basically they have a bunch of kind of community leaders, business leaders in the area, get quote unquote embedded within one of the groups at Luke Air Force Base, and some of us got to be embedded in a fighter squadron. So I was working with the 63rd Fighter Squadron, which is an F-35 fighter squadron. Those are the really cool jets. But as a part of that, they actually let me fly in an F-16. And so you get the training, you learn how to do like parachute egress training, like in case of an emergency, what do you do? You have to have a physical. There's all kinds of really cool stuff. Then they fit you for a flight suit. They get you a helmet. They give you a couple of barf bags to put in your pocket, and they put you in the back seat of this jet. And we're rolling down the runway, and my heart is just beating through my chest. I was so nervous. And we start rolling down the runway, and all of a sudden we take off, and they do a maximum climb. And so we literally just turned straight up, like pointed basically 90 degrees straight up. And we're just going like 400 miles an hour straight up. And it was unbelievable. Then we rolled and we're upside down. It was unbelievable. We went over by the dam. We went all through these canyons. We were flying. We went all the way down to Gila Bend. We went all the way up to we were everywhere, like in like 45 minutes. It was incredible. But at one point, the gentleman who was flying me, his name is Demon, and he said, "Do you want to take the stick?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'd love to take the stick." And so he's like, I'm flying left and flying right. I'm so excited. And he's like, "Okay, hit the stick hard all the way to the left, and we will do a barrel roll." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" And so I do it. And so we're doing barrel rolls, in, F-16 flying over the earth. He does really hard turn with 7 Gs, which is like basically your head is trying to go all the way into your stomach. And so a lot of people pass out at that point, but I didn't pass out, thank goodness. It was incredible. And just fun side story. Now, whenever I go on a roller coaster, it doesn't bother my stomach at all because I've been in F-16. And so now my stomach is used to going crazy. So I'm good now on roller coasters.
Oh, God, what a great story. Thanks. Well, Eric, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
If you want to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, Eric M. Bailey. Make sure you have the M in there. Fun story. I don't know if you know this about me, but there's a gentleman by the name of Eric Bailey, who's also a black male, also a former athlete, also a professional speaker. And when I first started my business, I actually started getting his emails. And so we started, communicating back and forth. And so when I wrote my book, I actually had to change my pen name so that it wouldn't be confused with him. So I am Eric M. Bailey. So you can find me on LinkedIn or all the socials on Eric M. Bailey, not Eric Bailey. But I connect on LinkedIn with everybody. I love LinkedIn. And if you want to grab my book, you can find it at thecureforstupidity.com. And I'll sign one for you and send it out directly to you. But you can reach me anywhere.
Well, it's a great book, and all of us at Duffy Group are really looking forward to kicking off our DEI education and workshops with you very shortly. So, Eric, thanks so much for our conversation today. It's great to connect with you as always, and look forward to seeing you soon in our workshop.
Yes, thanks so much, Kathleen. Good talking to you.
Likewise. And that's it for this episode of Revolutionizing Recruitment. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, make sure you take a second to subscribe so you'll automatically get my new shows when they drop. Also, if you have a minute, I'd love if you left me a review so more folks like yourself can discover the show. Until next time, take care.
This has been Revolutionizing Recruitment with Kathleen Duffy. To connect with Kathleen or to learn more about recruitment research, go to duffygroup.com.